Hmm.
Good evening and welcome to the After Hours show. I'm Joe in Norway. I'll be your cook for this evening. This is the Autonomous Collective. I'm joined by my co-host here, Ann Lee, a retired college professor and community member at the Daily Kos. She's a member of the National Council of Independent Scholars and is a contributor to the book, The Political Economy of Art, Making the Nation of Culture. Top of the evening, Ann.
Hey there.
Howdy.
Oh,
Well,
been a busy week. Busy week, as always.
Another week of atrocities, plague, and infectious disease.
Christ. Chaos.
Total
What's for dinner?
Well, we're sticking with the Levant-ish. Actually, I changed my plans of making za'atar on bread to something fresher. I realized that I haven't left the house all week and I only had cabbage and potatoes for fresh vegetables. Thursdays, we live in a small town, so Thursdays we get the fresh foods up from the south in the vegetable growing regions of the planet. So we got some lovely okra, some lady fingers. We're gonna get a little touchy-feely with these. I thought we do something focused mainly on the Levant in the Eastern Mediterranean, but we're going to do it East meets West. We've got seasoning from both Syria or the Levant, Levantine, Lebanon, Palestine, Syria, and North Africa, Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco. We have Ras Al Hanout, and then 7 spice mix of cardamom, clove, pepper, a number of things, cumin. What I thought I'd do is this is going to be a quick meal. Normally the dish is called bamia in Arabic, which is okra, stewed okra, basically. I'm not such a fan of the stewed form of okra. I prefer it quickly cooked and nice and fresh. So I'm going to do a little bit of some experimentation here. We're going to try to use the method I spoke about earlier in the week with cornstarch and aubergine, lightly dusting the eggplant with cornstarch before you fry it, encloses the surface so that it steams inside and is crispy on the outside. So we're going to try to do something with this, a quick kind of Chinese stir fry technique, a dry roast with that, with the cornstarch. I'm not sure, maybe it'll burn. And then I'm gonna make some bulghur with hummus or chickpeas, garbanzos, and cashew. So I've soaked some cashew. So we got some double protein going on here. And I've got a fine grain bulgur wheat, which is a cracked wheat. They steam the wheat, dry it, and crush it, and then sort it into different sizes. This is the fine version. It's similar to couscous in terms of the cooking time. So it just takes 5 minutes basically. So we're gonna saute onions or shallot and then toast this in the oil and then pour in the liquid and the beans and the seasoning and then let that sit for 5 minutes and it's done real super quick dish there. And then this should take no time in the wok. We're going to dry roast it initially and then throw in some diced tomatoes and whole cumin seed, and then the ras al hanout, which is turmeric, chili, pimiento. What else? Cumin, some other ones I've forgotten. And then we'll make it look nice pretty on the plate.
Yeah, I'm hungry already.
Mm-hmm. So I'll you have some updates on the Ukraine situation.
It's been a busy week in Ukraine. Most of the American or North American news has been the funding or lack thereof that the Republicans have been toying with or tying it to allocations of funds for border security, which just another shibboleth. It has a lot more contours to it. That there's been threats that the administration will go back to some more serious deportation policies on the southern border. So that's one thing that's gone on all week with fights one way or the other. So that's it's snowing in Ukraine. The ground is still a little soft, and so everyone's hunkered down a little bit. There've been some advances, but not much, and it's the usual back and forth. In the we'll start with the north. In the Advika area, fighting over that slag heap that's next to a coke plant. It apparently the Ukrainians seized back that little portion of land and planted a flag back on the slag heap. It may seem a minor thing, but it's a fairly large. It's kind of a mountain of a spoils pile for a major industrial area. So that's what they've been fighting over for several months, and so it's been back and forth. It is also the area where the Russians are taking a lot of casualties and still throwing a lot of troops, many of whom are conscripted or ethnic minorities from Russia. And so there's a fair amount of casualties going on in that area. The configuration remains pretty much the same. There's been a slight advancement in the Zaporizhia area, that center area where that arrow is, with a little bit of advancement and not. I think the cold weather has tended to keep people in place. It's not that movement hasn't happened. It's simply that there's been a lot of smaller drone attacks, blowing people up in their vehicles and stuff, and the loss of Russian vehicles is about 2-1, and it has been generally 2-1. The Russians, just simply from a tactical point of view, lose a lot more vehicles. There have been more tanks arrayed, deployed in that particular context. The equipment situation is almost the same. We know that the Ukrainians are training an F-16 everywhere, and that will probably form some of the air cover for whatever whatever offensive comes when the ground gets solid. There was launching more recently of air-launched ballistic missiles. They're the fairly large cruise missile, or no, they're not cruise missiles. They are ballistic missiles, very, very large. Almost some of the largest ones that can be launched from aircraft. And the Russians do a sort of standoff technique where they send up one of those really old Tu-95s with the turboprops, and have 4 of these missiles on them, and they really are very large ones. So they send one. They're trying to save money, I think. They send one up and launch 4 from each bomber, and these are the old nuclear bombers that the Russians had. And so they've been sending 10 to 20 missiles at various targets. This week, Kyiv has been hit multiple times. A significant number of missiles have been knocked down before they get to the capital. I think it was last night that I think all of the missiles that were headed towards Kyiv were knocked down. But when you knock them down, something still falls out of the sky, and so debris came down, and people were injured. But there's been generally missile attacks every night, or so that's one side of the battle. And then there's been the usual trench warfare, and so everything else has been things that are related to who's going to support what's going to be funded. The Europeans have been a little bit stronger about what they're going to do. The bigger distraction, of course, by comparison, has been issues related to Israel, which are actually much more important, considering that the Israelis are not saying when they're going to stop attacking. They're nearly half of their ordnance that they're dropping on Gaza has been dumb bombs, not precision weapons, and the Americans have been actually trying to force them to speed up whatever this offensive is. And I'm mentioning these as an aside, but they do relate to Ukraine in terms of the ultimate funding, because Israeli funding for Israel has tended to move slightly faster for a variety of reasons. Just to give you a little sideline, the tunnel network in Gaza may be flooded with seawater by the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, which, assuming that they've been storing missiles down there, that could be an issue for for Hamas. Needless to say, the casualty rate has not gone down. The very few hostages have been released. 3 hostages were killed. The Israelis say that it was accidental. Well, they just happened to get shot. It wasn't a mistake because of a bombing. It was strictly they were fired on by the Israeli Defense Forces. So there are 3 less hostages because the Israelis killed them. So this is that's kind of bad too. Some of the data that is now being tabulated, and about 87% of the original Russian army is off the field. That is, the Russian army has 87% less of its original force deployed, which means also that, of course, they've recruited with whatever mobilization they've been doing a fair number of troops. But as we've also talked about, some say it's 100,000 prisoners have been recruited, conscripted into the Russian army. So that's still going on. An additional 300,000 may occur. Putin, in his annual call-in program. Those of you not familiar, Vladimir Putin spends 4 or 5 hours talking to the nation in a televised call-in program. This year, somebody made an AI deepfake of Putin to ask Putin questions about his. It was interesting, actually. I mean, he didn't answer the question properly, but the deepfake was put together by some student in Leningrad or something, and the deepfake Putin asked the real Putin about his doubles, that he has people running around who look like him. So that was actually very interesting. That's probably one of the more interesting things that happened this week. So as I said, stuff happened in Donetsk. What you see now is the area of Divdika, which and you can see how with all the little dots there, that's where the slag heap is. And so it looks like a little salient, there's where the blue kind of it's a protrusion of some kind. That's the blue is the Ukrainians and the red is the Russians, and those little dots there are little areas where by fires. For those of you who are interested in this, you can actually watch the kind of ordnance being deployed by NASA has a satellite that allows you to see where heat signatures, major heat signatures have occurred. So you can actually get a little map that shows you where things have exploded, which is not that pleasant on the one hand, and even more unpleasant when you see some of the videos that now become released. But it's interesting to watch that happen. The other thing about looking at the snow in Ukraine is that snow will fill up the shell craters, the craters from impacts of artillery and missiles, and when you look at the battle areas, it's incredibly pockmarked. I mean, an incredible amount of artillery has been used in this war. But as we've said, there's been shortages, some reports about poor manufacturing in, you get failures of shells, the ones supplied to the Russians by the North Koreans. So that's kind of interesting. That has its own little amusement. First person drones have been actually quite effective, and I think that an evolution over the last year has been to have drones that there's a whole variety of drones. There are surveillance drones that sort of watch other drones attack, and on the one hand, it's very it seems a little clinical. It's not very clinical when you consider that the surveillance drones give you an image of the impact of another drone. Sometimes you get 2 or 3 different viewpoints on the same drone attacks, which are kind of fascinating. Then there's the other marginal things about trying to not use civilian vehicles. For some reason, the Russians, while in the field, use a lot of civilian vehicles, and as a consequence, the Ukrainians send drones after these very poorly armed armored vehicles, and they a lot of trucks have sort of go up, and but that's still not the majority. A majority of vehicles still are being lost by Russians by comparison to the Ukrainians. In other events, there's the political the political nature of things is hasn't moved quite as much, and I would say that that's we're stuck in some people may call it an impasse, but there's been a variety of other issues. So the last week we talked about how a bomber was taken down on the Odessa side, but there's The Black Sea has been relatively quiet. I'm going to guess that some of it has to do with the Russians have decided not to send anything out there, so there's nothing on the waters. There's slightly better coverage for grain ships coming from the southeastern coast to Istanbul, so that's a little better. The Ukrainians seized what some might refer to as an island. It has a memorable name. It's called Potemkin Island. It's not it wasn't populated with very many people, and it is on the one hand a major feature, on the other hand not an important critical piece of territory. How are we doing on the food, Joe? There it is. Can't hear you, Joe.
Because my mic was off. Yeah, we just got all the prep finished. Got the okra diced up, tossed with the spice mix and a little bit of cornstarch. So we're going to dry roast it here in the wok. And now I've got the shallots that have fried. I'm going to crank that up. I'm going to put in the bulgur wheat. So similar to when you make risotto, you can toast the rice in the oil or butter to heat up the grains, which then allows them to suck in more moisture rapidly. Do the same thing here. And let's do this real quick. Got some cashew nuts that were soaked. Do you still have more Ukraine to go over?
Sorry?
Did you have more Ukraine?
No, the last thing I wanted to make a comment on was that Zelensky showed up after going to several other countries to speak with senators in D.C. and simultaneous to that, it's interesting how it was timed out. Some Hungarians were meeting with members of the GOP House primarily, although J.D. Vance, I think, went to this meeting with Hungarians, which was some sort of coordination deal with Orban's people and the resisting of sending that large package of U.S. funds to Ukraine. So that was the kind of major deal in the United States, is the sort of, some might call it treasonous activity going in parallel, going on. So that's the other major event of this last week. The Hungarians weren't in town for 2 days.
Okay, I was also hearing some wording change from Biden, where it was, we will arm Ukraine until the end, and then now it's until we can. So was there a change in the wording in which the public announcements for support?
Well, there's lots of subtlety in this, and it's relatively minor compared to the issues of the U.S. trying to speed up to get to the end of the Israeli offensive in Gaza, which is, I think, has been the biggest thing. They sent the National Security Advisor to Israel to try and convince Netanyahu to hurry up. It's sad that it sounds that way, but that's exactly they want the Israelis to move up the end of their offensive by a month, essentially. And the Israelis refuse to say when they're going to stop combat operations.
Yeah, they basically said it could take years, didn't they? Or at least a year.
they implied that it would take that long. And of course they're trying to, ethnically cleanse essentially Gaza. It's quite awful. The whole business is awful.
We'll talk a little bit about that a little later.
Okie doke. Let me rant for a moment about speaking of DC. That it's been a very weird week. The current state of polling is that Trump leads Biden in 7 swing states. Now that doesn't really mean much at this moment relative to the election, but it is an interesting indicator. Even though there's a lot more details in it and a lot more sort of under the hood problems of the entire set of campaigns. The minor candidates are actually sort of interesting in this particular context. Most of the news has been about Trump being as crazy as he always is, to the point where he actually reproduced or reposted the tweet or the posting that suggested that he wanted to eliminate the Constitution. And this past week has been essentially continuing to try to walk back simultaneous to his desire to be a dictator. And truly, the man is deranged in that context, other than the usual back and forth about his various trials. A peripheral element to that is Rudy Giuliani. Now that they've it's a civil suit by the 2 women who were the election workers that he defamed, or they sued him for defamation, and I think, were asking for something like $50 million. Well, the jury came back with $150 million awarded to these 2 women, and he's going to be fully bankrupt. The kind of position that Giuliani took was that he was unrepentant. He still believes that they're part of a plot. I suppose it's the best he can do. $150 million buys a lot of ginger mints, that look like USB anyway drives. So that kind of the major news that's occurred today, and what has gone on before is, of course, the House GOP has left Washington, D.C., so Ukrainian funds are not going to happen anytime soon. The Senate has stayed in to try and move things slightly forward on existing bills. But as I pointed out in a posting over Daily Kos, is that the GOP is spending time trying to do an impeachment that has no evidence, an evidence-free impeachment of President Biden. And so I've opined that they're high on their own supply, to quote an old movie. They truly believe whatever delusion they're trying to push on this, and just the fact that an impeachment has been declared is not like actually having gone through the entire impeachment process. And so as long as they sort of declare it, it has some PR value, I think, in terms of the election, which is coming faster than we expect. But there are no high crimes or misdemeanors identified. And since Hunter Biden actually showed up to the Capitol to demand that the GOP committees have a public hearing, they don't want to do that. They would much prefer to have a behind doors deposition, which is actually a more normal procedure, and to sort of control the message in that particular context. So that was the other major sort of thing that went this week relative to the legal issues and the relation to the election.
So this is just more of a performative thing.
Oh yeah,
they're doing.
It's theater,
kind of like Benghazi.
Yes, it's just like the $31 million that they threw down the hole for Benghazi. I mean, it's just amazing that they can continue to do this. I don't know what the total of money they've spent on this, but the usual politics apply. What's his name? Comer, what's the Louisiana or Kentucky congressman. They've unearthed some other dirt on his own. I mean, the man's an idiot, but he seems to have a very checkered past as well. So that the disinformation on that side is sort of cranked up a little bit. Other than that, you have the usual things. Somebody actually, I can't remember who it was. What's his name? Kantowitz or something. It's a Florida guy. He tends to be a little kind of wild. I think he bought time on Cameo to have George Santos insult somebody. I think the speaker. It was pretty weird actually. So that's one thing. That's not as much it probably should have, but that was one thing that happened on earlier on in the week. That the stock market hit an all-time high. That's historically an all-time high. And recall that Trump has this thing about talking about how high the stock market gets when he was in charge. And the reality, of course, is that the stock market is not the economy. On the other hand, at the exact same time, on the same day that this achievement occurred, Trump was in Iowa claiming that if you vote for Joe Biden, that a major depression would occur. So clearly messaging is screwed. Trump screwed himself on this contradiction. And I truly hope they build an ad campaign around that. I think that would be kind of interesting, going along also with the dictator stuff. So that's kind of what's going on. And so if I'm going to rant about anything this week, it'll probably be about this coming week. It'll be about that, and that the usual things are occurring. An argument about whether tank warfare is still viable. Like every month or so, we have people argue about whether the age of tank warfare is over. Which is fascinating, but not quite so fascinating. And oh yes, there was something that happened today. A guy in a Western oblast of a small town, it's small city council. The city council is one of the members of the city council was angry that the guy who was in charge of local water, the local water supply, was demanding that they double his salary. They increase his salary by 100%, despite the fact that they're having water shortages. I think, for a variety of reasons. Guy goes out into the hallway, comes back with 3 grenades. They're not big grenades. They're, I think, practice grenades. But anyway, they're grenades. They're actual grenades. And he pulls the pin, explodes 2 of them in the council chambers. I think 20 people are injured, 5 people fairly critically with shrapnel, of course. And he blows himself up with the last grenade. And I don't know, it's sort of a cautionary tale, I suppose. I mean, on the one hand, it's a comment on local politics and corruption. On the other hand, there's sure a lot of grenades floating around in Ukraine. It's not the first time that grenades, a couple weeks ago, Some guy got blown up. That's a little weird. It was like in his Christmas. It was like a Christmas present or something, but that's a little vague about how it. Apparently, he had a bag of grenades and one was live, so it was a little, kind of weird. So, these stories, there are plenty of these stories, unfortunately. So that's kind of where we are now. There are two wars. The economy is going really well. There won't be a recession. It appears what is referred to as a soft landing. That is that there will be a dip in the economy, but it'll level out fairly quickly next year. And any prediction by the Republicans that it's all doom and gloom is really quite short-sighted. But the reality, of course, on the ground is that prices are still high, and this is consumer prices are high, and that's not going to level out until probably after New Year's.
Oh, excuse me, I was just painting a little bit here. Figure out. Now we can just plate up the dish and we're all ready to go.
Nice.
Bulgur should be finished. So this is spiced bulgur wheat with cashews and I always forget the name in English. Almost. What is almost? Chickpeas. Chickpeas. There we go. Peachy.
Whop. Nice.
Oh, hi.
John?
Hi.
We have any questions in the audience, in the room?
John? Well, I thought John was going to ask a question. Let me, while we're waiting here and watching, salivating over food, the Twilight Zone will be on at 8:30 Eastern time. That is in about 50 minutes. So expect that. And I'm not sure what else is on the schedule this evening.
That's about it.
We are
bring the news.
Bring the news.
Anybody
I don't
an
think
article that they're interested in.
I don't think Valley Vox is on tomorrow. So, but this and if it's not on, then this and that will be there. We've started looking at some other Marx texts and weekly Marx, considering the some things like the 18th Brumaire, for example. We've been reading Mike Davis's book on Old Gods and New Enigmas, and in the other thing, and we're going to look at Cadillac Desert in the movie night on Wednesday on a sort of history of California water, which actually there have been some fairly major articles on water policy in California that are also interesting, I would hope. Nancy, question?
Yes, well, I was asking what Joe put on the plate decoration, and also we still have the writer's workshop on Saturdays afternoon.
Oh, we do. I'm sorry.
At 2.
Writer's workshop, 2 p.m. Eastern time.
Yes.
So what the lattice underneath is
Yes,
called
what
strop.
is-
It's called strop. It's a Dutch uh, dish made of apple reduction. So you juice apples and reduce them till it's apple syrup, basically. So or
oh,
sometimes it's called apple molasses. So it has kind of a molasses taste, consistency, and it's sour like tamarind. So also, I didn't have any balsamic reduction, so I used that in place of tamarind or balsamic sometimes. So
well,
it's
sounds good.
really tasty. They put it on strop waffles. So that was the original before the caramel ones. And then I dry fried the okra, then added fresh tomato to create a little sauce. We've got toasted cumin seeds in there as well. And then we have a quick bulgur dish with 7 spices of cardamom, cinnamon, allspice, some other ones I can't remember off the top of my head. And we added some chickpeas and cashews. So a little variation.
Yum.
So there
I'm
was
hungry again.
switch over to my other machine here.
We're going to talk a little bit about Gaza.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to, let me see, where do I want to start here? So, friend of the former show, Professor Juan Cole, I don't know if anybody reads his informed comment. It's quite good because he does what he's always done since he worked the news desk in Lebanon. He basically every day does some either translation or summation of the ongoing conflict throughout the Middle East. This was just one post the other day that he had about, or I guess this morning, making a little reference to Albert Camus' The Plague. There are new numbers out of the Ministry from Health from Gaza about infectious disease, and the UN OCHA. They're explaining due to a lack of limited capacity of latrines, especially in IDP shelters, internally displaced people. People are adopting unhealthy coping mechanisms such as open defecation. In shelters, people wait for hours to access toilets, and in some other locations where IDPs are located, no toilets are available at all. Children reportedly defecate in the open while adults resort to buckets and dispose of waste in impoverished areas, improvised areas, or solid waste dumps. In many locations, solid waste is piling up with no effective waste management mechanism for collection or disposal. Reportedly, rats and insects, including mosquitoes, congregate in these areas, contributing to risk of spreading disease. Goes on to mention winter rains contributing to the issue, broken water pipes, no available water. Basically, the UN states there have been significant increases or increased risk of outbreak in some communicable diseases and conditions such as diarrhea, influenza, chickenpox, meningitis, jaundice, impetigo, acute respiratory infections, skin infections, and hygiene-related conditions like lice and scabies. Heavy rains and floodings, which affected large parts of Gaza on the 13th of December, compounded human misery and added to the risk of waterborne illnesses. It's just incomprehensible what's going on. What was the other? This is the Middle East Monitor. Ministry of Health in Gaza explained that health teams have detected 325,000 cases of infectious diseases that arrived at health centers from shelters, noting that the actual number is likely much higher since many people cannot reach the health services. And they keep concentrating the populations into smaller and smaller locations.
Well, the overall death toll is what, 18,000 now, with 50,000 people.
70% of whom are said to be women and children. About 55,500 reportedly injured. Many people missing, presumed buried under the rubble. This site, OCHA Services Relief Web, they give daily flash reports for anyone interested. Juan Cole's site, he basically will summarize these things for you if you want to limit yourself to what you're exposed to, just to deal with it.
Needless to say, it's horrible.
Absolutely. Now, I mentioned last week this Plus 972 magazine. It's the country code for Israel. Started out as journalist bloggers, and now they've basically got a number of Israeli and Palestinian journalists covering essentially what the mainstream doesn't touch in Israel. They became popular, or they popularized, I guess they kind of broke the March of Return story that eventually the Western press began to cover. So the other week, they came out with this story about the AI-driven assassination factory. This is an article. It's quite extensive reporting that they've done. And basically, it's an investigation with another media company, Local Call, and is based on conversations with 7 current and former members of Israel's intelligence community, including military intelligence and Air Force personnel who were involved in Israeli operations in the besieged Strip, in addition to Palestinian testimonies, data, and documentation from the Gaza Strip, and official statements by the IDF spokesperson and other Israeli state institutions. Highly recommend giving a read if you've got the time. It's quite extensive. They go into the program talking about targeting a lot. The numbers increased with their program that they've been using since the 7th of October. The numbers increased from dozens of civilian deaths, which were permitted. That means that they're willing to accept as collateral damage as part of an attack on a senior official in previous operations, to hundreds of civilian deaths as collateral damage now. They go on to say that nothing, this is an official speaking, nothing happens by accident. When a 3-year-old girl is killed in a home in Gaza, it's because someone in the army decided it wasn't a big deal for her to be killed. That was a price worth paying in order to hit another target. We are not Hamas. These are not random rockets. Everything is intentional. We know exactly how much collateral damage there is in every home. Again, Gaza is one of the most surveilled places on the planet. Israel has data on everything. According to the investigation, another reason for the large number of targets and extensive harm to civilian life in Gaza is the widespread use of a system called Habsora, or the gospel, more biblical references, which is largely built on artificial intelligence and can generate quote unquote, generate targets almost automatically at a rate that far exceeds what was previously possible. This AI system, as described by a former intelligence officer, essentially facilitates a mass assassination factory.
Now, wouldn't you say that this is just simply optimizing targets? In other words, if they've surveilled the entire membership of Hamas, they're probably following them all around via whatever communications. And so essentially, it's a list, and they just go down the list, and they don't care about collateral damage.
Yeah, they have 5 separate target types which they go into, and they talk about all of the different methods and whatnot. So in a majority of cases, the sources added, military activity is not conducted from these targeted homes. I remember thinking that it was like if Palestinian militants would bomb all the private residence of our family when Israeli soldiers go back to sleep at home for the weekend. One source who was critical of the practice recalled. Yeah, that claim where Hamas is using human shields, where they're in civilian population, no different on the Israeli side. These soldiers go back to their family on the weekend. Military is based in center of Tel Aviv. There's just a couple other things I wanted to point out. This is one of the lists of the different types of targets that they have. The third are called power targets, quote unquote, which includes high rises and residential towers in the heart of cities and public buildings such as universities, banks, government offices. The idea behind hitting such targets, say 3 intelligence sources who were involved in planning or conducting strikes on power targets in the past, is that a deliberate attack on Palestinian society will exert civil pressure on Hamas. So these types of targets are in the neighborhood centers, basically. So they would have shopping, bakeries, like the heart of a neighborhood where people get supplies and come to congregate and whatnot. So they're absolutely devastating when those are hit. We asked to look for we are asked to look for high-rise buildings with half a floor that can be attributed to Hamas, said one source who took part in previous Israeli offensive in Gaza. Sometimes it is a militant group's spokesperson's office or a point where operatives meet. I understood that the floor is an excuse that allows the army to cause a lot of destruction in Gaza. That is what they told us. If they would tell the whole world that the Islamic Jihad offices on the 10th floor are not important as a target, but that its existence is a justification to bring down an entire high-rise with an aim of pressuring civilian families who live in it in order to put pressure on terrorist organizations, this would itself be seen as terrorism. So they do not say it, the source added.
Indeed. And considering that they're using dumb bombs at least half the time, it is like carpet bombing.
Mm-hmm. One more point. So previous operations have also shown how striking these targets is meant not only to harm Palestinian morale, but also to raise the morale inside Israel. Haaretz revealed that during Operation Guardian of the Walls in 2021, the IDF spokesperson's unit conducted a PSYOP against Israeli citizens in order to boost awareness of the IDF's operations in Gaza and the damage they caused to Palestinians.
As my recollection is, during that operation, they, it's the same disproportionate carnage of Palestinians who died in that operation.
According to intelligence sources, the Habsora this is the AI system they have, generates, among other things, automatic recommendations for attacking private residences where people suspected of being Hamas or Islamic Jihad operatives live. Israel then carries out large-scale assassination operations through heavy shelling of these residential homes. Habsora explained one of the sources processes an enormous amounts of data that tens of thousands of intelligence officers could not process, and recommends bombing sites in real time. Because most senior Hamas officials head into underground tunnels with the start of any military operation, the sources say the use of a system like Habsora makes it possible to locate and attack the homes of relatively junior operatives. One former intelligence officer explained that the Habsora system enables the army to run a mass assassination of factory in which the emphasis is on quantity and not on quality. A human eye will go over the targets before each attack, but it need not spend a lot of time on them. Since Israel estimates that there are approximately 30,000 Hamas members in Gaza, and they are all marked for death, the number of potential targets is enormous. It's just an enormous scale of destruction that they're performing. Obvious war crimes, incredible, all with the funding of the state. This issue about stopping them, a lot of these weapons are stored on a military base inside Israel, U.S. military base inside Israel. They're essentially just using the stockpiles there.
Well, that's part of American policy. America will be putting additional new bases in Finland.
Along the border?
Yes. There's, I think there will be 10 sites. I think that was the current report that I read today. Because, now that the Finns are part of NATO, that you have to protect the border. So
maybe they'll migrate from Norway to Finland. They're up in the north.
Oh, right. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, it's about the Russian border. So, yeah.
Well, I think that's about all we had. I may.
Nancy has another question. Nancy, do you have another question?
Anyone else?
Yeah, today the Israelis acknowledged that they actually killed 3 of the hostages.
Right.
So I'm wondering if you think that will change any of the dynamic or the world opinion about what's going on.
Well, it has been played up a little bit, and they acknowledged, everyone I think acknowledged that they did that. It isn't that the Israelis really apologized for it, but it was pretty clear that it wasn't, it wasn't collateral damage from bombing. Rather, they actually the Israeli forces shot these people. So
There's also some belief that there's little concern among the hostages because they come from the more leftist dominated kibbutzim on the south, or they're foreign workers, so they're not as valuable to the Israelis. But, I don't know.
John, you have a question?
Yes. How certain is it that Netanyahu and his government knew that an attack was coming? What did they do in response to that threat? And if nothing, doesn't that suggest that they were willing to sacrifice Israeli lives in order to continue to carry out a land grab in Gaza, in the West Bank, too?
It's certainly one kind of ancillary effect of and the problem in this war is analogies. For example, Masha Gessen was denied the Hannah Arendt Prize in Germany. The sponsor pulled the money, and some other things occurred. Masha Gessen writes for the New Yorker, and but the issue was that a recent thing she wrote analogized Gaza to to ghettos, like the Warsaw Ghetto, and there's a kerfuffle about that. So it is about the problem of analogies to, for example, Pearl Harbor and 9/11, which is what the front end of the explaining the delay in response is. And there's no decent explanation right now that the Israeli government has provided that I recall for the delay.
The reporting that I've seen is that it was roughly a year before.
Oh, yes, they knew about it a year before.
Yeah, knew about it a year before. John, do you remember the Bin Laden determined to attack U.S.?
I do.
memo?
I remember
August.
that memo. Yeah.
August, the Downing.
And I'm
history
sure
doesn't
that,
repeat it.
and I'm sure that Netanyahu will meet the same stern, swift rebuke that George Bush administration met after that.
Well, funny you should mention it. We can't be so cynical all the time, or realist, I mean. But Israel does have a history of, after the fact, holding people to account and heads rolling. It happened to Golda Meir. It happened to people in the Lebanon War. So he's been prime minister for too many years, 18, almost 20 years or more on and off. And the lack of I don't even want to call it a peace process. It wasn't a peace, it was an apartheid process, but all of this policy is on his hands, his watch. Gaza specifically, that policy was his propping up Hamas, and the siege, all of this is on him. So my assumption is that his head will roll.
All right.
But
well, I'm going to hold my breath, but I think I can hold it for about 3 or 4 minutes. I don't know if I can hold it for a year.
You don't have to hold your breath, because I can reassure you, after living in Israel under several different labor and Likud governments, there is no difference in the policy of operating the occupation. That runs the same regardless of who gets in. So there's that. And on that note,
so Netanyahu's head may roll, but a different head is going to come in, which may roll later in the future.
Later.
Yes.
Right.
Then,
Got it. Okay.
A little over 25 minutes. We will have Twilight Zone. Just reminding you of that as well. Oh, John Hayes has a question. John?
Not necessarily a question, but did anybody else hear? I think it was Majority Report today that that Biden had criticized Israel and specifically talking to Netanyahu about this situation, and Netanyahu's comeback was something like, "You guys dropped bombs, in World War II, and some other criticizing of the U.S.
Mhm.
Thing is, Biden was a infant, basically. Well, he was maybe a toddler when that happened. Netanyahu is alive right now, and he's in charge right now. Biden had nothing to do with World War II. So
Well,
try to
yeah,
make
yeah.
that distinction, huh, Netanyahu?
Well, and in World War II, we didn't have highly technical guided munitions. It was just dropping dumb bombs.
Well, and also the threat is, yeah, I mean, the comparison of the threat is ridiculous.
It's basically saying,
Comparing
screw
Nazi
you, Biden.
Germany to Hamas.
Well,
Yeah,
the thing that the Israeli leaders fret about is that the state was founded inconveniently after the foundation of the Nuremberg principles and humanitarian law post World War II, and that's been a big problem with them because they would have already finished the Nakba long ago. It's just that technically what they're doing right now isn't supposed to be allowed to happen anymore.
Yep.
Right. Damn those Nuremberg resolutions. Humanitarians.
Well, thanks everyone.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you next week.
Thank you,
This has
everyone. See you
This
next
has
week.
been the Autonomous Collective, theautonomouscollective.net. See you around.
Outro.
Wow.